Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Hollow's Truth: A Journey Beyond the Veil. The wind was unusually gentle that evening, carrying the scent of cinnamon bark and old maple wood as it brushed against the windows of a countryside inn. Inside room 6, nestled between creaking timbers and amber-glowing lanterns, a young woman named Illyra sat cross-legged on a cushion, a weathered leather notebook in her lap. She had not written in it for months. The fire in the hearth danced with quiet confidence, casting flickers of light on the carved wooden beams above. Outside, the golden hour was fading. It was the sort of twilight that arrived not with drama but with a kind invitation, as though the world itself was whispering, "Come along, there's something waiting." Illyra closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the quiet consume her. For once, there was no hurry, no deadline, no buzz of city streets behind her. Just her, the crackle of fire, and a long-awaited journey calling from beyond the pages of her journal. She dipped her pen into ink and began to write. October 12th, tomorrow I walk the hollow path. They say the pumpkin fields beyond Old Hollow Ridge glow at sunset like an ocean set ablaze. I want to see it. No. I need to. The map from the attic points to a trail not shown in modern guides. Perhaps no one has walked it in years. But I will. There was a knock at the door. A quiet one. Then silence. She rose, expecting the innkeeper, but when she opened it, no one stood there. Only the corridor, dimly lit, and at her feet a folded note. No wax seal. No name. Just her own handwriting staring back at her, though she had never written it. Follow the sound of dry leaves. Chills. Not of fear. Of something older. Something that recognized her. She looked down the corridor and saw nothing but the swaying shadows of candlelight. Still, the moment had done its work. She wouldn't sleep tonight, not really. Her dreams would already be walking that path. The next morning broke with thin mist rolling over the hillside like a veil lifting from the face of something sacred. Illyra packed only what she needed: a flask, a book, and a small compass she had found in the old family chest 2 winters ago. The innkeeper, an older man with moss-colored eyes, nodded silently when she passed him at the door. The hollow path? He asked. She paused. Yes. He gave no warning. Only smiled and said, "Good. It remembers those who listen." With that, she was gone. The gravel crunched underfoot as she left the village behind, boots damp with dew. Birds chirped distantly. Each step forward felt like brushing against a veil, one that thinned the farther she walked. By the time the trees opened up to reveal the hollow path, the world behind her had already changed. It wasn't just the scenery. It was the air, the way it held its breath. She followed the path's bend through overhanging trees. The branches weren't quite like the ones she remembered as a child. They curved inward like archways of a forgotten cathedral. Sunlight broke through in shards, like stained glass made from amber and gold. Leaves red, ochre, burnt sienna rustled under her steps. A sound. She stopped. Not the wind. Not the birds. Laughter. Distant. Childlike. Gone as quickly as it came. Illyra didn't smile. But she wasn't afraid. She adjusted her satchel and kept walking. The hollow path wasn't on any of the modern maps, but her notebook told a different story. It spoke of the harvest rite, an old ritual performed by wanderers who believed that pumpkins grown under October's first frost could reveal memories that didn't belong to you. It was said the fields could help you remember names you'd never spoken, and dreams you'd long forgotten. As she reached the top of a low ridge, the land opened wide. There it was. The first glimpse of the patch. Endless rows of pumpkins, some large as barrels, others small enough to fit in a palm. They weren't neatly arranged. They spilled across the land like stars across a velvet sky. Some were white as moonstone, others green flecked with gold, but most were a soft glowing orange as if lit from within. She stepped forward and the wind shifted, pulling her coat back. For a moment, the breeze sounded like a whisper. "Welcome back, Illyra." She froze. Because this time, it wasn't in her voice. The hollow path sloped gently downward now, curving into a valley shrouded in morning gold. Illyra's boots pressed into earth softened by mist, stirring the scent of moss and wild thyme. As she descended, the wind swept through the canopy above like a slow breath, rustling branches that had held stories for longer than any traveler could count. The countryside unfolded with quiet beauty. To her left, the hillside dipped into an orchard's edge, trees heavy with red-tipped leaves. On her right, a stone fence ran parallel to the path, overgrown with ivy that bore little blueberries like forgotten wishes. Farther ahead, a rustic wooden sign leaned slightly, pointing east. "The Lantern Trail, Travelers Welcome." Illyra stopped. She didn't remember this from the map. The sign was carved carefully, old but lovingly tended, not broken or forgotten. Beside it sat an old lantern, unlit, but hanging from a shepherd's hook driven deep into the ground. When Illyra moved closer, the glass flickered briefly. But there was no flame. She narrowed her eyes. Behind the sign, a narrower trail curved through the trees, partially hidden beneath heaps of fallen leaves. There was something about it not eerie, but waiting. She reached out and touched the lantern. The flame came alive. Just like that, a tiny, warm flicker, dancing against the morning fog. A second later, along the trail ahead, another lantern blinked on. Then another. And another. One by one, the path lit up in a staggered string of glowing amber lights, vanishing into the woods like a necklace of fireflies suspended in air. She followed them. The trail dipped beneath a low canopy of elder trees. The lanterns floated slightly now, no longer hung on hooks, but suspended by some unseen charm. Each step felt softer than the last, as though the leaves were cushioning her passage, not just covering the trail, but welcoming her presence. A rustle to her left made her pause. A fox. Not the shy, darting kind, but one that stood calmly in the underbrush, eyes glowing amber to match the lights overhead. It watched her without fear. Then, slowly, it turned and trotted off, following a side path through the trees. She almost followed. Almost. But the lanterns were still glowing ahead, steady, beckoning her forward. Something in her heart told her that whatever this path was, it had been waiting a long time for someone who remembered how to listen. As the morning deepened, the air warmed slightly. A low wooden bridge emerged ahead, arching over a slow-moving creek lined with smooth stones. The water was glass clear, and below its surface, tiny silver fish swam in calm patterns like shifting runes. Illyrio leaned on the bridge railing and watched. On the opposite end, a small bench had been carved directly into the base of a tree. There were initials etched in its bark, old ones, worn down with time. E+M 1984. A crescent moon beside a fox. She traced the markings with her finger. "I wonder who you were," she whispered. The wind stirred gently in reply. After resting briefly, she continued. Past the bridge, the lanterns began to fade. One by one, they dimmed and disappeared into the shadows of their hooks, not extinguished violently, but as though they had simply fulfilled their purpose. In their place, sunlight took over, beams piercing through the thinning trees, illuminating bursts of goldenrod and the faint blush of mushrooms sprouting along the path. At one bend in the trail, Illyrio saw a scarecrow. It stood alone in a wide field cleared of trees, dressed in linen and a slanted straw hat, arms outstretched, one sleeve fluttering in the breeze. But it wasn't guarding crops. No corn. No pumpkins. Instead, surrounding it was a circle of wildflowers, purple asters, sunbursts of marigold, and tiny white blooms like snowflakes on stems. In the center of the circle was a bundle of wheat, bound in red twine and topped with a small brass bell. She stepped forward. The air felt still. Sacred. Not a grave. Not exactly. A memory. She left a single maple leaf, the same one she had picked up near the gate beside the bell. It didn't feel like an offering. More like an introduction. Then she turned, and the wind picked up again, rustling leaves, guiding her onward. Finally, the trees began to part. The path widened. Illyrio crested a hill, and there below her, stretched the true beginning. The pumpkin fields. But they were not empty. Dozens of people wandered the land below, families, couples, solitary souls. Some carried baskets, others sat by haystacks or walked slowly among the sprawling rows of gourds. In the far corner, a wisp of smoke rose lazily from what looked like a bonfire circle, framed by fairy lights and wooden arches. Beyond it all, at the edge of the fields, a small barn stood with a black roof and white sides, the very place her mother had once sketched in the margins of a forgotten journal page. Illaра's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what she'd find here. But she knew this was where she was meant to be. She took her first step down the hill. Toward memory. Toward mystery. Toward something waiting in the harvest haze. The descent toward the valley was gentle, like a lullaby written in earth and leaves. Illara walked slowly now, her eyes dancing between the distant outlines of the barn, the curving trails through fields of orange, and the rising smoke from what could only be a fire pit nestled somewhere among the trees. Before she reached the heart of it all, the path narrowed once more, funneling her toward an old wooden booth perched beside a waist-high fence wrapped in twisting vines. The structure looked almost like a child's drawing, asymmetrical, hand-painted signs curling at the corners, with soft yellow ribbons fluttering lazily in the breeze. A small brass bell tinkled overhead as Illara stepped beneath the booth's awning. Behind the counter sat an elderly woman, her silver hair braided and looped into a crown that shimmered like frost in the morning light. "Welcome to Gourd Hollow," the woman said, her voice smooth and warm like cider by a fireplace. Illara blinked. "Gourd Hollow." The woman smiled. "That's what the locals call it. Though most maps have long since forgotten. Funny how some places only remember those who remember them." She reached into a wooden drawer and retrieved a stub of paper, a ticket with faded ink and pressed leaf designs. As she handed it over, Illara noticed something peculiar. The ticket had her name on it. Handwritten. In her mother's script. Her breath caught. The woman nodded gently, as if understanding without words. "Some journeys," she said, "begin before your feet ever touch the path." Illara opened her mouth to ask something, anything, but the woman waved her off kindly. "You'll find the answers you need in the fields. For now, take your time. The pumpkins are patient." Stepping past the booth, the full grandeur of the pumpkin patch unfolded before her like a woven tapestry of the season. The scent of rich soil, fallen leaves, and sun-warmed fruit filled the air. There were pumpkins in every direction, tall and squat, smooth and warty, orange, white, green, even a pale lavender that shimmered slightly under the sun. They grew in winding rows, not straight and ordered, but curved and coiled like paths of their own, some hugging the base of willow trees, others crawling up tiny wooden trellises like vines escaping the ground. Children laughed in the distance, their voices rising like birdsong. Somewhere, a wooden flute played a slow, drifting melody that seemed to carry on the wind. Illara paused beside a pumpkin almost as tall as her knees. Its surface was dappled with flecks of silver. She reached out, tracing the ridges with her fingers. It was cool and smooth, oddly calming, like touching river stone. "Each one holds a memory," someone said nearby. Illara turned. A man in a forest green cloak stood not far off, holding a small pumpkin in both hands as though it were something sacred. He had a short beard, streaked with copper, and a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. "Do they?" she asked. He nodded, eyes crinkling in a half-smile. "Some say the ones with silver marks were grown from seeds touched by moonlight. They remember dreams." Illyra raised an eyebrow. "Whose dreams?" "Yours." "Mine." "Maybe someone not born yet." He gently placed the pumpkin into a basket at his feet and walked away without another word. She stood there for a moment longer, watching him vanish between rows of gourds, then continued on. Further ahead, the path split in two. A wooden signpost pointed in opposite directions. Hayrides and bonfires rightward arrow. Orchard and treat stalls leftward arrow. She followed neither, not yet. Something to the left caught her eye, a small clearing framed by tall sunflowers. At its center stood a woven arch of branches and vines, crowned by a garland of dried herbs and tiny bells. Above the arch, carved in flowing script, "Where the past is planted." She stepped through. Inside, small pumpkins sat atop wooden pedestals, each one carved with initials or symbols. A few had dried flower petals laid at their base. It looked like a shrine, no, a memory garden. One pedestal had a familiar shape carved into the wood, a spiral. The same spiral her mother had doodled countless times in the corners of notebooks. She kneeled. And suddenly, the breeze grew warmer. The air seemed to hum. Somewhere behind her, wind chimes stirred. Illyra didn't cry. Not yet. But she pressed a hand to her chest and breathed deep, letting the stillness move through her like water through stone. When she stood again, the garland at the archway swayed gently. Almost in farewell. Emerging from the garden, she found herself back on the main trail. The smell of roasted nuts and warm cider teased her senses. The distant laughter of children echoed like birds over an orchard. But even with all the noise and color, Gourd Hollow didn't feel busy. It felt alive. Not chaotic. Not loud. Just vibrant. Watching. Breathing. Waiting. And somewhere deep inside, Illyra knew this wasn't just a farm. This was a place between seasons. Between memories. Between who she had been and who she was becoming. Illyra stepped deeper into Gourd Hollow, her boots crunching gently across a blanket of leaves that painted the earth in rust and amber. The trail widened now, unfurling like a canvas of color and curiosity. Before her stretched a vast sea of pumpkins, rows upon rows, scattered like constellations fallen from the sky, each one glimmering under the filtered autumn sunlight. At first, it was overwhelming. She had expected pumpkins, yes. But not like this. These weren't mere crops. They were characters. Some were as round and glossy as polished glass, others craggy with twisted stems like horns reaching skyward. There were squat, plump ones huddled together like gossiping villagers, and tall, oblong gourds that leaned into one another as if whispering secrets only the soil could hear. Colors ranged from the expected soft orange, burnt sienna to the uncanny, frost white, stormy gray, deep moss green, and even a rare hue that shimmered between violet and gold depending on the angle of light. And more curious still, many of them bore markings. Not carvings. Not graffiti. But faint, natural patterns on their skin. Spirals. Arrows. Stars. Even delicate lines that resembled runes, half erased by the passage of time. Illyra knelt beside one with a pale silver mark shaped like an open eye. When her fingers brushed it, the air shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just different, as though the world had blinked and refocused itself. She blinked too. In that instant, a memory surfaced. One she hadn't thought about in years, her mother humming softly in the garden at dusk, planting bulbs by candlelight, saying something Illyra couldn't quite recall. A whisper at the edge of memory. And then it was gone. The pumpkin remained still. Silent. But it no longer felt like just a fruit. It felt like an old book with pages she had only just opened. As she moved from row to row, she noticed that others, too, were interacting with the pumpkins in curious ways. A boy in a striped cap leaned his forehead against one of the white gourds and smiled as though hearing a joke meant just for him. An elderly woman traced a heart shape on a knoblet orange one and whispered a name before placing a dried flower at its base. A man with a wooden flute played a low, winding melody while sitting cross-legged in a field of green speckled squash, eyes closed in reverie. Illyra felt a strange ache, not pain, but recognition. This place wasn't for picking fruit. It was for remembering. Eventually, her path brought her to a tall scarecrow standing sentinel at the center of a circular clearing. It wore a wide-brimmed hat stitched with moons, and its coat was patched with fabric bearing symbols she didn't recognize, or perhaps, she'd forgotten. At its feet was a wheelbarrow of miniature pumpkins, each the size of an apple, and painted with scenes. One showed a lighthouse under stars. Another, a steaming mug beside a frosted window. Another still, a fox curled beneath a bare tree. They weren't decorations. They were memories, pressed into paint and pulp. A small wooden sign beside the wheelbarrow read, "Take one, and walk with its story." Illyra hesitated, then chose one painted with a lantern in a dark forest. She cradled it carefully and felt, not heat, but a quiet pulse in the stem. As if something inside recognized her. She tucked it into her satchel beside her journal. From the scarecrow's perch, she could see nearly the whole patch now. To the east, the orchard she had visited earlier shimmered with ruby-red fruit. To the west, plumes of smoke marked the fire pit, now surrounded by low laughter and the gentle glow of fairy lights. Straight ahead, beyond a slight rise, stood the white and black barn. And closer, very close now, was a long table set under an arbor of twisting vines, where people sat carving pumpkins, not into jack-o'-lanterns, but into intricate scenes, mountain ranges, rivers, starlit skies. Illyra moved toward it, drawn like a moth to flame. But just before she reached the arbor, something to her left shimmered. A narrow footpath, half hidden beneath an archway of willow branches, pulsed faintly with light. Unlike the lantern-lit trail from earlier, this path had no lights, no signs. Only fallen petals. Illyra paused. Another choice. She looked back at the pumpkin in her satchel and noticed that the painted lantern on its surface now had a soft glow. Dim. Faint. But unmistakably there. She grinned despite herself. "All right," she whispered. "Show me what you remember." And she stepped off the main path, disappearing beneath the whispering branches. The willow branches arched low, brushing gently across Illyra's shoulders as she entered the hidden trail. It smelled of sweet moss and damp bark, as though the earth had just exhaled after a long dream. Each step muffled under a bed of petals and pine needles, soft as memory. No other visitors followed. No signs marked the path. But her painted pumpkin still pulsed faintly in her satchel, the little lantern on its shell glowing warmer the deeper she went. After several minutes, the trees parted. She stepped into a small glade bathed in soft, dappled light. The sun filtered through tall maples and honeyed birch trees. In the center of the glade stood a wide stone well, ringed by ivy and wildflowers. It was old, ancient, even, but still and silent, as if waiting. Beside it stood a man. He wore a tunic the color of frost and carried a basket woven from reeds and copper wire. His face was marked with deep smile lines and eyes the shade of distant rain clouds. He looked up as she approached and gave her a quiet nod. "You came through the lantern trail." Illyra blinked. "You know about that?" He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Most who wander through here do so without noticing. But not many carry one of those." He pointed to her satchel. She drew out the tiny painted pumpkin. The lantern etched into its skin glowed gently still. "I found it near the scarecrow," she said. "You didn't find it," he replied. "It found you." Illyra tilted her head. "What does that mean?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his basket and retrieved a pumpkin of his own. Smaller than hers, but etched in careful detail with a closed door surrounded by stars. He held it out. "Would you like to trade stories?" Illyra hesitated, then nodded. They sat beside the stone well, legs crossed, pumpkins between them. The man's name was Corven. He said little of where he came from, only that he had walked the hollow for many seasons, but never the same one twice. He told her about the storycords pumpkins that didn't simply grow from seeds, but from memories buried in the soil by travelers who didn't know what they had left behind. "The fields here don't grow like other farms," he said. "They grow from longing, from wonder, from the things we're not ready to forget." He turned his pumpkin slowly. Each mark is a whisper, a choice someone didn't make, a place someone dreamed of. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, they open. Open. Ilora echoed. Corben smiled. Not physically, but here. He tapped his temple. Or here. He tapped her chest. He looked at her pumpkin. That lantern. That's a path still being remembered. You haven't walked it fully yet. Ilora stared at the tiny glow. I think it's been calling me. He nodded. It always does. The wind picked up briefly, scattering petals across the clearing. A bell rang somewhere in the distance, soft, single, like a call to attention. Ilora turned. Do you live here? Corben didn't reply. When she turned back to him, the basket was still there. But he was gone. Only the pumpkin with the closed door remained in his place. She picked it up carefully, the texture cool and rough under her palm. Unlike hers, it didn't glow. But it felt heavy. Meaningful. Like a key without a lock. She looked around. The wind had stilled. The trees were quiet. And for a moment, she wasn't sure if she had truly spoken to anyone at all. But when she reached into her satchel to tuck the new pumpkin inside, she found a folded piece of parchment had been slipped between the pages of her journal. In careful script. Some doors open when you stop knocking. She walked back slowly, tracing her steps through the willow path. When she emerged again into the main pumpkin field, the light had shifted, now warm and golden, as if late afternoon had arrived during her brief detour. She spotted a group of children chasing one another near a stack of hay bales. A couple sat beneath a tree sharing a thermos of cider. And beyond them, the path toward the orchard and bonfire still awaited. But Ilora turned toward the scarecrow again, toward the table where others sat quietly carving their memories into pumpkin skin. She wanted to try. To see what her hands might remember. As she sat at the long vine-covered table, a gentle breeze stirred the tools beside her: brushes, carving knives, small bottles of gold ink. She placed her glowing pumpkin before her, its little lantern still bright. Beside it, the one with the closed door. Without thinking, she dipped her fingers into the ink and drew a line between them. A bridge. A thread. And for a heartbeat, just one, she swore she felt the pumpkins hum in reply. The light of late afternoon spilled golden across the valley, casting long, drowsy shadows between the pumpkins. The buzz of activity carried softly on the wind: laughter, distant music, the faint clink of cider mugs tapping together. Ilora stood quietly at the edge of the field, a carved pumpkin cradled in her arms. Its little lantern, now edged with gold ink, glowed brighter than before. A warmth radiated from it, not heat, exactly, but a low thrum of memory. She glanced down at the map tucked under her arm, a hand-sketched parchment the old woman at the booth had slipped into her basket without a word. It wasn't like any map she'd ever seen. There were no roads. No buildings. Only moments. Drawn in delicate ink. A pair of boots resting beside a fire. A mug of cider with steam rising like smoke signals. A child dancing in falling leaves. A door opening into stars. A pumpkin with a spiral etched into its skin. And in the center, a compass rose, but instead of directions, the 4 points read: memory, wonder, rest, curiosity. Illyra touched her finger to wonder. The ink shimmered faintly. When she looked up again, the wind had shifted, tugging gently at the edge of her coat in a particular direction toward a line of twisted wooden arches ahead, half concealed by willow trees and fairy lights. Above the arch hung a wooden sign. The Wandering Orchard. As she passed beneath the archway, the scent of apples and cinnamon wrapped around her like a familiar scarf. The orchard beyond was not perfectly trimmed. The trees grew wild, letting their branches stretch out and interlace overhead, forming tunnels of color. Apples hung in every shade: ruby red, honey gold, even deep midnight blue. Some trees bore lanterns instead of fruit, glowing gently among the leaves. Others had tiny notes tied to their branches, fluttering like prayer flags. Illyra plucked a small, speckled apple from the nearest tree. As soon as she held it, a whisper brushed her ear. Last autumn in the greenhouse. The first frost and the second kiss. She nearly dropped the fruit. Looking around, she saw others reacting in kind, some smiling at their apples, some crying softly, others just staring into the trees as if remembering something precious they hadn't realized they'd forgotten. She took a bite. It tasted like cinnamon tea and laughter on cold mornings. Farther down the path, she found a row of wooden carts and stalls. Each one had its own personality: mismatched curtains, carved signs, small pumpkins set like sentinels on every corner. The air here was rich with warmth and spice. At one stall, a man stirred a massive copper pot filled with bubbling cider. He winked as she approached and handed her a steaming mug without asking. The mug was heavy ceramic, hand-glazed in forest green with a little pumpkin etched into its side. As she sipped, her shoulders relaxed instantly. "Don't worry about paying," the man said with a grin. "This one's on the house. First-timers always get the autumn heart blend." "What's in it?" Illyra asked. He shrugged. "Whatever you needed to remember most today." She laughed softly. "That sounds dangerously personal." "Only if you let it be." Illyra wandered to a bench beneath a tree lit with tiny glass orbs. She sat, wrapped both hands around the mug, and took another slow sip. Around her, the orchard hummed not with noise, but with presence. It wasn't loud. It was alive. Nearby, a girl of no more than 7 handed a miniature pumpkin to her grandmother. The older woman smiled and whispered something into it before placing it on a stone pedestal beneath the tree. Illyra watched the scene unfold with a tender ache in her chest. She wondered how many of the pumpkins here carried names, moments, songs, silences. She finished the cider and rose. Time to keep walking. The path led her to the edge of the orchard, where the trees parted to reveal a circular clearing surrounded by hay bales and low lantern posts. In the center, a fire pit crackled gently, smoke curling into the dusky air like dreams rising toward the stars. A ring of chairs mismatched, time-worn, inviting surrounded the flames. Some were empty. Others held quiet figures sipping from mugs or simply staring into the fire, lost in thought. Illyra took a seat on a bale closest to the flame. Someone passed her a roasted chestnut wrapped in paper. She nodded in thanks, then stared into the fire orange and violet flames dancing in slow, mesmerizing patterns. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time had softened around her. The pumpkin in her bag pulsed quietly. The map in her coat pocket rustled faintly. And somewhere, in the distance, bells began to chime slow, deep, like echoes from across a river of stars. The fire crackled softly, its warmth mingling with the cool evening air, as Illyra sat back on the hay bale and allowed the quiet to sink in. The scent of burning wood, sweet apples, and autumn spices wrapped around her like a blanket. The firelight flickered in the eyes of those gathered near it, faces soft with the same serene peace she felt. The bonfire's glow cast long shadows across the pumpkin patch, illuminating rows upon rows of pumpkins that seemed to shimmer under the fading light. The soft clinking of mugs and the faint hum of voices created a melody all its own. There was something magical about the way the people here moved, not hurriedly, not anxiously, but with a calm that came from being in the right place at the right time. Illyra took another sip from the cider mug the man had given her earlier. It was warm and comforting, like the soft hum of a lullaby. She looked around at the gathering. Families huddled together on the hay bales, sharing stories and laughter, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Children played tag, their shrieks of delight filling the air, while parents smiled fondly, keeping watch from the edge of the firelight. A couple sat across from Illyra, their hands intertwined. The woman wore a green scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, and her eyes sparkled with quiet joy as she listened to the man beside her. He had a warm smile, his fingers absently tracing the rim of his mug. Over by the edge of the field, an older man sat on a bench, holding a small pumpkin in his hands. He didn't speak, but there was something in his expression, a quiet contemplation, a reverence for the season. Illyra couldn't help but wonder what memories danced in his mind, as they did in the pumpkins. Further still, she spotted a young boy no more than 5 crouched down near a particularly large gourd, his tiny hands gripping its surface as he examined it with the kind of intensity only children seem capable of. His mother stood a few steps behind him, watching patiently as her son searched for the perfect pumpkin. And then there was the old woman from the booth, She was standing now, holding a basket of freshly baked pumpkin bread, and offering it to passers-by. She smiled warmly at everyone, offering slices with an energy that belied her age. Her laughter rang out across the field, infectious and full of life, drawing others to her like moths to a flame. Illyra watched them all, a soft smile on her lips. She felt at peace here, as though the air itself held something she didn't fully understand but knew she needed. Something she had been missing. The pumpkins around her seemed to hum, their soft glow pulsing in time with the crackling of the fire. The air had a golden hue now, as the sun dipped lower, painting the entire patch in the warmth of dusk. The coolness of the night was starting to creep in, but for now, the fire kept it at bay. A movement caught her eye. A woman, standing near the far edge of the pumpkin patch, was holding a pumpkin high above her head. Her arms were outstretched, her eyes closed, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Illyra watched her for a moment, intrigued by the woman's peaceful expression. The woman's lips moved, and Illyra could just make out the soft murmur of a song, a low, melodic tune that seemed to blend with the rustling of the leaves and the whisper of the wind. It was a tune that felt familiar, though Illyra couldn't place it. As the woman finished her song, she lowered the pumpkin and turned toward Illyra, as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met, and the woman gave a small nod, her expression kind but knowing, as if she had been waiting for Illyra's arrival all along. Illyra didn't know why, but she felt drawn to approach her. When she reached the woman, she found that she was no longer holding the pumpkin but instead was holding a small pouch in her hands, a simple thing, made of faded cloth with no markings. The woman held it out toward Illyra. "Take this," she said softly, her voice carrying the same calming melody as the song she had just sung. Illyra hesitated, unsure of what it was. But there was something about the woman's presence, something in the way the air seemed to hum around her that made her trust her instinct. She reached out and accepted the pouch, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It was heavier than it appeared. The woman smiled and said, "You're meant to have it. The path ahead is not one of certainty, but of discovery. Take this, and it will guide you when the time comes." Illyra glanced down at the pouch in her hands. "What is it?" "A token of the hollow," the woman replied, her eyes sparkling with a secret only she knew. "But more than that, it's a piece of the journey. A reminder of the stories waiting to be told." Illyra wanted to ask more, but the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Illyra standing there with the pouch in her hand, feeling more uncertain yet more certain than ever before. She sat back down on the hay bale, the pouch resting gently in her lap. The fire crackled louder now, as if calling her attention back to the present. The air had grown cooler, and the shadows stretched long across the patch, merging with the evening. The pumpkin in her satchel pulsed faintly again, as if urging her onward. She glanced at the map she still carried, the one with the symbols and the paths drawn in ink. It was no longer just a map of Port Hollow. Now it felt like something more, a map of her own journey, a journey she was only beginning to understand. As she looked up, she saw the woman once again, this time standing beneath the flickering lanterns, a quiet smile playing on her lips. Illyra couldn't help but feel that this was not just a simple harvest festival. It was something far deeper. A story was unfolding, and she was now a part of it. The evening settled in with quiet grace, the first stars twinkling softly above as Illyra stood at the edge of the pumpkin patch, her heart still pulsing from the unexpected encounter with the woman. The pouch in her lap felt heavier now, more significant, and the little lantern pumpkin hummed quietly in her satchel, as though it had its own purpose, one Illyra was only beginning to understand. As the last light of the sun faded behind the distant hills, she followed the map once again, its edges frayed from her travels. The trail led her to the far side of the patch, where the twisted arches of willow trees met, creating a passageway one she had passed earlier without noticing. There was a soft pull in the air, a call that came from within the depths of the orchard. The orchard. Her eyes were drawn to it as if the trees themselves were beckoning her closer, each one casting long, shadowed limbs across the path. They stood like sentinels, their leaves a rich mix of russet, amber, and dark gold. But it wasn't just the trees that caught her attention. It was the scent. The apples here weren't ordinary, they smelled of honeyed sweetness with an undercurrent of something else. Something familiar, yet forgotten. Illyra couldn't help but take a step forward, the quiet crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound in the stillness. The map's ink shifted once again, as though urging her to walk into the orchard, into the maze of fruit and memory. As she passed through the archway formed by the willow trees, the scene changed subtly. The air grew sweeter, cooler, and the apples hanging from the branches shimmered faintly in the dimming light, their skins glistening with a dew that didn't seem entirely natural. Some of the apples were golden, others deep red, and there were even ones that sparkled with silver dust. Illyra reached out to touch one, her fingers grazing its smooth skin. A ripple ran through her as soon as she made contact, a jolt of recognition, of something she could not place. She blinked, and the orchard seemed to shimmer, the edges of the trees warping as if they, too, were not entirely of this world. Then, a soft whisper broke the silence. "Don't pick just any apple," a voice said, low and rich with a cadence that seemed older than time. Illyra spun, searching for the source of the voice. A figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, a tall, slender man, his features obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He wore a long coat made of dark velvet that seemed to absorb the light, blending into the night like a shadow made flesh. "You're here," the man said, as though he had been expecting her all along. Illyra opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. He smiled gently, his eyes glowing faintly beneath the brim of his hat. "I know what you're thinking, child. No need for words. We all come here when we need to remember something lost." He stepped closer, and Illyra felt the strange pull of his presence, an energy that was both unsettling and comforting. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice a mere whisper. "I am called Fallasleepfast," he replied, his voice as smooth as the wind through autumn leaves. "And I am the keeper of this orchard." Illyra glanced around. "Keeper?" Fallasleepfast nodded. The orchard grows on memories, on the names we forget, on the things we leave behind. He walked slowly among the trees, his fingers brushing against the branches as he went. Some people come here to find what they lost. Others come here to leave something they no longer need. He paused and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. But not all apples are meant to be picked, Illyra. Some are better left hanging. Illyra's heart skipped a beat. How do you know my name? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the folds of his coat and withdrew a small, delicate apple, its skin a deep shade of violet, speckled with silver. He held it out to her. This apple is yours, Fallen said, his voice carrying an air of finality. It has been waiting for you. But be careful. Every apple here contains a choice. Illyra stared at the apple. It seemed to pulse gently in his hand, almost alive, as if something within it was calling to her. She hesitated. The choice was hers. The sound of footsteps echoed through the orchard, drawing Illyra's attention. She turned to see a group of figures emerging from the shadows, not from the trees, but from the very earth beneath her feet. They were tall, shadowed shapes, dressed in robes that shimmered with the same silver dust as the apples. They were walking toward her. Fallen stepped forward, his hand raised to silence the approaching figures. These are the guardians of the orchard, he said quietly. They tend to the memories that linger here, protecting the harvest. They are not here to harm you. Illyra watched them closely. Their faces were obscured by their hoods, but there was an aura of ancient power about them, an energy that hummed in the air like a low melody. One of the guardians, taller than the rest, stepped forward and bowed slightly. The harvest is ready, Fallen. Fallen nodded, then turned back to Illyra. You are ready, too. The orchard is prepared to offer you what you need, but you must decide. He gestured toward the trees. The apples in this orchard represent more than just fruit. They are fragments of life, choices made, moments passed. Every apple has a story. And every story has a price. Illyra felt a surge of emotion, something deep inside her stirring. She glanced at the apple Fallen had given her, then back at the orchard. The apples seemed to beckon her, their glimmering skins glowing softly, their mysteries calling. But something held her back. The weight of the choice. What if she picked the wrong one? Fallen spoke again, his voice softer now, almost like a whisper. Don't rush, Illyra. The apple you choose will not define you, but it will guide you. Choose wisely, for it will carry your heart's truth. She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the violet apple once more. It felt warm in her hand, the weight of it grounding her. She closed her eyes. And then, without a second thought, she placed the apple back on the tree. The evening had settled deeply into night, and the cool air of autumn wrapped itself around Illyra as she stepped back from the orchard. The soft glow of the lanterns in the pumpkin patch still illuminated the path ahead, but it felt different now. The air hummed with something unspoken, something more than just the crisp scent of leaves and earth. Illyra glanced at the apple in her hand again, the one Ellen had given her. It had felt like a choice, but in the end, she had left it hanging. For some reason, she couldn't bring herself to take it. Instead, she turned back toward the lively crowd near the fire pit, the flickering warmth of their laughter calling her back. Maybe she needed a moment of simplicity. Something familiar. Something grounding. The scent of caramelized sugar and spice filled her senses as she walked past the lantern-lit stalls. She noticed a cart near the far side of the field, its brightly painted wheels turning slowly with the wind. There was a sign above it, hand-painted in swirling letters. The Autumn Confectioner, Sweet Memories Inside. Illyra was drawn to it without thinking. Her curiosity piqued, she stepped forward, the sweet aroma growing stronger with each step. The cart was smaller than most, with wooden shelves lined with jars and boxes, each labeled in playful, elegant handwriting. Sweet golden ribbons cascaded from the cart's edges, and atop the counter was a large bowl of plump, red apples, glistening with caramel and sugar. Behind the cart stood an older woman, her silver hair flowing in intricate braids, each one woven with tiny, fragrant herbs. Her smile was warm, and her eyes sparkled with a mischievous light. "Ah, a traveler, I see," the woman said, her voice light and welcoming. "You look like someone who could use a little sweetness." Illyra smiled, feeling the comfort of the familiar warmth in her presence. "I think you're right," she said softly. The woman motioned to the counter. "Would you like to try some of my special caramel apples, dear? They're made with the finest autumn harvest, and a touch of magic, of course." Illyra raised an eyebrow. "Magic?" The woman winked. "Only a little. But the magic of autumn is best savored when it's shared, wouldn't you agree?" Illyra nodded, watching as the woman carefully dipped a fresh apple into a vat of molten caramel. The rich, golden syrup swirled around the apple's surface, coating it with a shiny, sticky glaze before being rolled in crushed pecans and a sprinkling of cinnamon sugar. The woman handed it to Illyra with a knowing smile. "It's more than just a treat, my dear. It's a memory, sealed in sweetness. Take a bite, and it will show you what you need to remember." Illyra hesitated for a moment, then took the apple in her hand. It felt warm against her palm, the caramel gleaming in the firelight. She bit into it. The first taste was a rush of sweetness, the caramel smooth and rich, the apple crisp and fresh. But as the sweetness lingered, something strange happened. The world around her softened. The firelight blurred and flickered, and the sounds of the festival faded into the background. The warmth of the apple seemed to grow within her, spreading out from her chest like a wave, and for a brief moment, she was no longer standing in the bustling orchard. She was back in her childhood home. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, sugar, and the warmth of her mother's voice as she hummed softly while stirring a large pot on the stove. Illyra watched herself, younger, a little girl with wide eyes, sitting on the wooden counter, swinging her legs back and forth. Her mother turned to her, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Do you know what happens when we add just a pinch of cinnamon to the apples, Illyra?" The young Illyra shook her head, her eyes full of wonder. "What?" Her mother leaned in close, as if sharing a secret, and whispered, "It makes them remember the taste of autumn." Illyra blinked, and the memory faded. She stood there in the orchard, the sounds of laughter and music returning, the warmth of the cider in her hand once more real. The caramel apple was still in her grasp, but the moment had passed. Her heart thudded in her chest, both comforted and unsettled by the vividness of the memory. She looked up at the woman, who was watching her with a knowing gaze, a soft smile curling at the corners of her lips. "That was incredible," Illyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The woman nodded. "The taste of autumn brings many memories, child. Some are sweet, some bittersweet. But all of them are yours." Illyra felt a lump in her throat, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the apple. The woman's words rang true, echoing in her mind like a song she couldn't quite place. "Sometimes, the smallest things hold the greatest meaning," the woman continued, her voice calm and soothing. "Like the way a memory can change when we remember it, or the way a taste can bring us back to moments we thought we'd forgotten." Illyra nodded, her heart full of the weight of what she had experienced. The woman's words settled into her chest like a promise, one she wasn't sure she fully understood yet, but one that felt important. Before Illyra could say anything more, the woman turned back to the cart, humming softly as she began preparing another batch of caramel apples. "Take your time, dear," she said over her shoulder. "The night is young, and Gourd Hollow has many more secrets to share." Illyra stood for a moment longer, watching the woman work. The warmth of the apple lingered in her chest, a soft, gentle reminder of the memories waiting to be uncovered, of the sweetness and the sorrow woven together in the quiet moments of life. She took one last look at the orchard, the soft glow of the lanterns lighting the path ahead, and then, with a deep breath, turned back toward the heart of Gourd Hollow. There was more to this place than pumpkins, more to this night than the gentle pull of the map in her pocket. She wasn't just here to wander. She was here to remember. The warmth of the caramel apple still lingered in Illyra's chest as she wandered deeper into the heart of Gourd Hollow. The evening was growing late, and the crowd around the bonfire had thinned, with only a few lingering souls still basking in the glow of the flames. The air had cooled, but the sweetness of autumn, the rich scent of apples, spice, and the smoky undertones of the bonfire remained thick in the air. Illyra felt an unfamiliar pull, one that seemed to guide her steps toward a small clearing just beyond the last of the stalls. It wasn't marked by lanterns or signs, and it wasn't on the map she carried either. But there, tucked between two large pumpkin patches, was a weathered wooden bench, half hidden beneath the limbs of a gnarled oak tree. She approached it slowly, her heart beating with a quiet excitement. The bench was old, its slats worn by time and weather. The kind of bench you would find in a forgotten corner of a garden or a park, where memories were made and left behind for someone else to stumble upon. There was something about the bench that felt important. Illyra sat down carefully, running her fingers along the rough wood of the armrest. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the crisp night air, the sound of leaves rustling above her. A soft murmur of voices from the nearby bonfire filtered through the trees, but it felt distant, like the world was falling away from her. When she opened her eyes, she saw a figure standing in the shadow of the tree, just beyond the bench. It was a man, tall and cloaked, his face partially obscured by the dark hood of his cloak. His presence was quiet, almost ethereal, as if he had stepped out of the shadows themselves. Illyra felt an odd mix of curiosity and recognition, though she couldn't place what. The man tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging her without words. "You found it," he said, his voice deep and rich, like a forgotten song. Illyra blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "Found what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bench," the man said, taking a slow step toward her. "It's not just a place to rest. It's a crossroads. Between the world of the waking and the world of memories." He paused, as though weighing his words carefully. "You can ask the bench for something. Something you've lost. Something you need." Illyra felt a cold shiver race down her spine, though she didn't understand why. She had no idea what the man was talking about, but there was something so familiar about the idea that this bench could be a conduit, a gateway. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, but it was a smile full of secrets. "Sit. Ask. Listen." The man stepped back, disappearing into the shadows of the oak tree as Illyra stared at the bench in front of her. She didn't know what to ask. What was it she had lost? What was it she needed? The world around her seemed to fade, and for a moment, she felt utterly alone. The lanterns in the distance flickered like distant stars, the sounds of the festival quieting until there was only the rustle of leaves. And then, without thinking, she spoke. "I need to know who I am." The words escaped her before she could even consider them, a quiet plea whispered to the bench, to the night. She felt her heart race as soon as the words left her lips. For a moment, there was nothing. The world remained still, and Illyra felt foolish for speaking aloud. She let out a shaky breath, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks on her. And then, she heard a sound. A soft whisper. It came from the wood beneath her, the bench creaking as though it were alive. "You are not what you think you are," the voice said, its tone both soft and heavy at once. Illyra's breath caught in her throat. The voice wasn't from the man, nor from anyone else nearby. It was a voice she felt more than heard, as if it came from deep within the earth itself, from the roots of the very tree beneath her. "You are more than what you remember. More than what you've forgotten. Her heart pounded in her chest. The words felt like a riddle, a puzzle she couldn't solve. The bench shifted again, the wood creaking with an almost imperceptible sigh. Illyra sat motionless, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the words she had just heard. "Remember," the voice whispered again. "Not all who wander here are lost. Some only need to find what they left behind." For a moment, she thought she saw something shift in the shadows, a flicker of movement, a glimmer of light. But when she looked again, nothing was there. She stood up, the feeling of being watched still heavy on her shoulders. The whisper of the voice lingered in her mind, gnawing at her, urging her to understand. The figure appeared again, the man in the dark cloak stepping into the circle of lantern light. He nodded once at her, as though acknowledging her unspoken thoughts. "You've heard it," he said simply. Illyra nodded slowly, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and understanding. "What do I do with this?" The man smiled again, a knowing smile. "Nothing. The bench will guide you when it is time. For now, you must trust that it has given you what you need." With that, he turned and disappeared once more into the shadows, leaving Illyra standing alone beneath the oak tree, the soft hum of the world returning. Illyra stood there for a long time, her mind swirling with the weight of what had just happened. The feeling of the bench, the whispers, the words. They were like fragments of a dream, pieces of something she had almost forgotten. She looked down at the pouch that Fallen had given her, now pressed firmly against her side. The map in her pocket seemed to pulse lightly, as though urging her forward. It was clear now. The orchard, the pumpkins, the whispers, they weren't just part of a harvest festival. They were part of her own journey, a path she had to follow to discover the truths that had been lost long ago. Illyra took a deep breath and walked back toward the center of Gourd Hollow, where the firelight flickered and the laughter of strangers filled the night. But now, the world felt different. The memories, the choices, the mysteries were no longer just echoes. They were real. And Illyra was finally ready to listen. The night had fallen fully now, and Gourd Hollow was aglow with the flicker of lanterns and the soft murmur of quiet voices. Illyra moved through the field, her footsteps light as if she were floating, the air around her thick with the fragrance of pumpkins and the crisp bite of autumn. The energy here was different now. It was as if the field itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with her thoughts. The whisper of the wind carried with it echoes of her earlier discoveries, the voice from the bench still ringing softly in her ears. "You are not what you think you are." The words repeated in her mind like a forgotten tune, and for the first time since she had arrived, Illyra began to understand that the place itself was as much a part of her journey as her own. Memories. Gourd Hollow wasn't just a collection of pumpkins and harvest festivities. It was a reflection of her, of what she had lost, what she had forgotten, and what she needed to find again. She passed a group of children running and playing by the hay bales, their laughter a sharp contrast to the stillness she felt inside. She smiled faintly at them, but the sound of their joy seemed distant, like a memory she hadn't fully experienced yet. Further ahead, an elderly couple sat together on a bench beneath a willow tree, their heads close, whispering softly to one another. The man handed the woman a small, golden pumpkin, its surface polished and smooth. She laughed gently, taking it into her hands with a warmth that made Illyra's heart ache. The scene was peaceful, timeless, a quiet moment of shared joy, like the kind her parents had once shared, before things changed. Illyra continued walking, her eyes scanning the field. Everything felt familiar, yet foreign at the same time. It was as if poured hollow held pieces of her past, waiting to be uncovered. Her gaze shifted to a small group of strangers seated around a low wooden table. They were carving pumpkins, but not in the usual way. The pumpkins weren't just being turned into jack-o'-lanterns with toothy grins. Instead, the group was using delicate tools to etch intricate designs into the skin's flowers, geometric patterns, even symbols that looked strangely ancient. The pumpkins were being transformed into something more than decorations. They were becoming stories. One of the figures looked up as she passed, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his hood, but his eyes gleamed with recognition. "You've come to carve your own story, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low and warm. Illyra hesitated. "I'm not sure what story I need to carve." He smiled, his gaze piercing. "The pumpkin you choose will tell you. But be careful. Sometimes, the stories we carve can change the ones we remember." She glanced around the table at the others. They were all busy with their pumpkins, faces focused in concentration. Some were humming softly to themselves, others lost in thought. Each one of them was carving something different, something uniquely personal. Illyra turned back to the man. "How do I choose?" He gestured to the pumpkins around them. "Choose the one that feels right. It will speak to you, like the lantern that guided you here. Trust that you already know the story you need to tell." Illyra knelt beside the table, her fingers grazing the surface of the pumpkins. Each one felt different beneath her touch, some smooth, some rough, others with deep ridges. She closed her eyes for a moment, reaching for the quiet part of herself that had been hidden for so long. The right pumpkin. The one that would speak to her. Her fingers brushed over a small gourd, its surface dimpled with imperfections. But there was something about it. Something familiar. She picked it up, turning it gently in her hands. This pumpkin felt like a memory. She returned to the table, pulling a carving tool from a nearby basket. The man stood back, watching her with a knowing expression, as if he had seen this before. Illyra began to carve. At first, the movements were hesitant, unsure. But then, the lines began to flow. She carved slowly, carefully, as if the pumpkin itself were guiding her hand. The image that emerged was simple, but powerful: a door, open wide, surrounded by swirling vines and blossoms. As she worked, the pumpkin seemed to come to life in her hands. The door symbolized something: a passage, a beginning, an ending. It was a symbol of choice, of change. Illyra felt the carvings pull something inside of her, something that had been buried deep, perhaps for years. The soft glow of the lanterns above flickered as she finished the last cut, and for a moment, the pumpkin pulsed in her hands. The door seemed to glow not with light, but with something more. A promise. She looked up, and the man was watching her closely, his face unreadable. "You've done it," he said softly. "The story is yours now." Illyra stared at the pumpkin, her heart racing in her chest. The door had opened, and though she couldn't see through it, she knew that something had shifted inside her. Something she had been too afraid to face. But now, with the pumpkin in her hands, it was clear. The path was waiting for her. The man stepped forward and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You've carved your story, Illyra. But now you must decide, will you walk through the door you've opened, or will you stay here and leave the past behind?" The words lingered in the air, thick with meaning. Illyra's heart beat faster. The choice was hers. The door on the pumpkin wasn't just a carving. It was a decision. A decision to move forward. To remember. To change. She stood up, the pumpkin still warm in her hands, and looked around at the people in the field. They were all lost in their own worlds, carving their own stories, but somehow, they seemed to be waiting for her, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She took a deep breath and walked back toward the center of Gourd Hollow, the door on the pumpkin glowing softly in the cool night air. The choice was hers, but for the first time since she had arrived, she didn't feel lost. She felt ready. The glow of the pumpkin lantern still pulsed softly in Illyra's hands, its light flickering like a silent heartbeat. Her footsteps were light as she walked away from the carving table, each step taking her closer to the edge of Gourd Hollow. The field, the pumpkins, the voices of strangers, all of it seemed distant now. She was on the cusp of something new. The air had turned crisp, and the sky above was a deep shade of violet, dotted with the first stars of the night. The sound of the festival had faded into a soft hum behind her as Illyra walked toward the far corner of the field, where the familiar barn stood, its white walls glowing softly in the moonlight. It wasn't just any barn. It was a place Illyra had felt drawn to since the moment she had first seen it. The barn of forgotten paths, according to the old map in her pocket. The barn had been there all along, but it hadn't seemed real until now. As she walked toward it, the lantern in her hand seemed to grow brighter, as though urging her forward. It was strange, this pull she felt toward the barn. As though it was a threshold, a door to something deeper, something buried in her own past. The barn door creaked open as Illyra approached. The sound was faint, barely audible over the rustle of leaves, but it was enough to let her know that it was waiting for her. She stepped inside, her boots crunching on the gravel floor as she crossed the threshold. The inside of the barn was just as she had imagined, vast, echoing, and filled with the scent of dried hay and old wood. There were no animals here, no farming tools or bales of hay stacked high. Instead, the barn seemed to be filled with a collection of oddities. To the right, there was a shelf lined with old, dusty books, their spines cracked and yellowed with age. To the left, a wooden table covered in strange artifacts, old clocks, rusty keys, weathered maps, and jars filled with dried herbs. In the center of the barn stood an old mirror, framed in dark wood and covered in ivy. The glass was cloudy, its surface fogged over as though it had been untouched for years. Yet there was something about it, something that called to her, as if the mirror knew she was coming. Illyra hesitated, her heart racing as she approached the mirror. She didn't know why, but the closer she got, the more it felt like the mirror was waiting for her to look into it. She stood before the mirror, her reflection distorted by the fogged surface. Her face was blurred, like a memory half remembered. The lantern in her hand flickered again, and for a brief moment, the reflection shifted. It was her, but older. Her face was lined with time, her eyes filled with a wisdom she had yet to experience. The vision lasted only a second, and then the mirror returned to its familiar state, her reflection once again clear and youthful. But the image had left a lingering sense of unease, as though something hidden beneath the surface was just waiting to be unlocked. Without thinking, Illyra reached out and touched the glass. The moment her fingers brushed against it, the mirror rippled, as though the surface were made of water. The barn around her seemed to blur and twist, the walls bending and stretching as if they were made of smoke. A soft voice whispered in her ear, and Illyra spun around. She couldn't see anyone, but the voice was unmistakable. You are on the right path. But it is not the only one. The choice is yours, Illyra. Do you wish to see what lies beyond the mirror? The voice echoed in the barn, but there was no answer. The air grew still, and the mirror seemed to pulse with a soft light. Illyra took a deep breath and stepped closer to the mirror. The fog began to clear, and as her reflection came into focus, she saw something different. Behind her, the barn was gone. Instead, the mirror showed a different place, a dense forest, bathed in twilight. The trees were tall and twisted, their branches reaching toward the sky like ancient fingers. A narrow path wound its way through the forest, disappearing into the distance. And standing at the end of the path was a figure. It was her. But not quite. The figure in the mirror was an older version of Illyra, her face marked by time and wisdom, her eyes filled with the same quiet strength that Illyra had seen in the woman at the carving table. The woman who had handed her the golden apple. The woman who had whispered about memories and choices. The older Illyra smiled gently, as if recognizing her. It's time, the figure said softly, her voice calm but commanding. The path ahead is yours to choose. But you must first understand what it means to remember. Illyra's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the pull of the mirror, the beckoning warmth of the reflection. She wanted to step forward, to reach into the image and find what lay beyond. But she hesitated. She wasn't ready. Not yet. With a final glance at the mirror, Illyra stepped back. The barn around her returned to normal, the mirror's surface once again still and clear. The path ahead, the one she had seen in the reflection, was still there. But for now, she knew it was a path that could wait. The barn door creaked again as Illyra turned to leave, the echoes of the voice still lingering in her mind. The choice is yours, Illyra. The past, the present, and the future, they are all yours to shape. But remember, not all paths lead where you expect them to. As she stepped outside, the cool night air filled her lungs. She felt the weight of the lantern pumpkin in her hand, its glow soft but steady. The glow wasn't just light. It was a guide. And Illyra knew that the time had come to make her decision. The cool night air seemed to thicken around Illyra as she stepped away from the barn, her mind swirling with everything she had just witnessed. The mirror had shown her more than just a reflection, it had shown her a choice. A path forward. But also a path behind. The lantern in her hand pulsed softly, its gentle glow guiding her steps as she walked away from the barn. The festival around her continued, but it felt different now. The laughter of the revelers was distant, like the sound of a dream fading away. The music, the lights, the pumpkin patches, all of it felt like it was on the edge of something, just out of reach. Illyra had known from the moment she arrived in Gourd Hollow that it was no ordinary place. But now, with the mirror's reflection still haunting her thoughts, she was starting to understand just how far this place reached into her past, her choices, and the story she was only beginning to uncover. The whispers of the wind seemed to carry something deeper now, more urgent. The soft rustling of the leaves, the creaking of the trees, even the distant call of the owls, it all felt like a language. A message she needed to decipher. She walked slowly through the field, her eyes scanning the ground before her. The lantern in her hand flickered once, then dimmed, casting long shadows across the path. She noticed a small cluster of stones near the edge of the pumpkin patch, each one carefully arranged in a circle. It was too perfect to be accidental. Illyra knelt, her fingers brushing over the smooth surfaces of the stones. As she did, a low hum resonated beneath her touch, like the pulse of something ancient, something alive. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if the earth itself was listening. She sat cross-legged beside the stones, her heart racing. The hum grew stronger, and suddenly, she felt a presence. It was subtle, but unmistakable, a kind of energy that filled the air, wrapping around her like a fog. Illyra. The voice was soft but clear, as if it came from the roots of the trees themselves. The same voice from the mirror. The path you walk is not only yours. It is part of something greater. A story that spans across time, through choices not yet made, through memories that live and breathe. Illyra stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am the voice of Gourd Hollow, the keeper of memories and the weaver of paths." The air shifted again, and Illyra found herself surrounded by the sound of rustling leaves, like whispers from every direction. She looked up, her eyes scanning the trees, the pumpkin patches, the people around her, but she could see no one. The world was still. Then, in the distance, she saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the field, bathed in the light of the lanterns. The figure was tall, cloaked in a robe made of dark, flowing fabric that shimmered faintly in the night. The figure was facing her, its face hidden beneath a hood. Without thinking, Illyra began walking toward it, her feet moving almost of their own accord. She didn't know why she was drawn to this figure, but something deep inside her knew she had to. As she drew closer, the figure lifted its head slightly, and Illyra felt a rush of recognition. "It's time, Illyra." The figure's voice was familiar, but not in the way she expected. It was the same voice from the mirror. The same voice that had guided her through the barn. The voice of the hollow. When she was close enough, the figure stepped aside, revealing an archway made of intertwining vines and branches. Beyond it, the path was dark, leading into a forest of twisted trees and thick fog. The air was cool and damp, and Illyra could feel the weight of the night pressing in. The figure nodded toward the path. "Go. The roots of the hollow run deep, and only you can decide which ones to follow." Illyra hesitated. "But I don't understand." "Why me?" The figure's hood shifted slightly, revealing only the faintest glow beneath the darkness. "You have always been part of this story, Illyra. The hollow knows you, as it knows all who walk its paths. But the time has come for you to choose." With a final glance back at the fields of pumpkins, the firelight, and the distant voices, Illyra stepped forward into the archway. The air was heavy, the ground soft beneath her feet. The path ahead seemed endless, stretching into the dark, misty forest. Each step she took felt like she was stepping deeper into herself. The fog swirled around her, and the whispers of the hollow grew louder, like a symphony of voices calling her name. "Remember, Illyra." The voice came again, this time clearer, more insistent. "Remember who you are." She paused. The words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't quite grasp them. Who was she? Was she the girl who had arrived at Cord Hollow in search of answers? Or was she someone more, someone whose story had already begun long before this moment? She stepped forward again, her hand brushing against the nearest tree. The bark felt warm under her touch, like the earth itself was alive with energy. She could feel the roots beneath her feet, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. The path twisted, and Illyra felt the air shift once again. The fog seemed to thin as she walked deeper into the forest, and ahead, she saw a faint glow, the same soft golden light that had guided her earlier. The lanterns, the pumpkins, the memories, they all seemed to lead here. The figure was gone, but Illyra knew she was not alone. The hollow was alive, watching, waiting. And now, she was ready to discover what it wanted her to remember. The fog grew thicker as Illyra ventured deeper into the forest, the soft glow of the lantern pumpkin in her hand casting faint light on the twisted trees around her. The path before her was narrow, winding between ancient oaks and willows whose branches tangled above, creating an almost impenetrable canopy. The air felt heavy, saturated with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and every step she took seemed to echo in the stillness of the forest. The whispers were louder now. They filled the space around her like an invisible current, swirling through the trees, brushing against her skin like the caress of an old memory. She couldn't understand the words, they were fragments, broken and elusive, but they felt familiar, like whispers from a distant dream. She gripped the lantern tighter, its soft glow a comforting beacon in the encroaching darkness. The further she walked, the more the path seemed to twist and wind, as if the forest itself were shifting, guiding her deeper into its heart. The trees began to thin, and Illyra found herself standing at the edge of a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a stone well, its edges worn by time, covered in thick ivy and moss. The well seemed ancient, its surface cracked and weathered, yet it felt as if it had been waiting here for centuries, untouched but ever present. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like an unseen wind. She could feel the weight of their presence, as though the very air itself was alive with memories, ready to reveal something she had forgotten. Illyra took a tentative step toward the well, her heart beating faster as she neared it. She had no idea why, but something within her urged her forward, a deep pull that she couldn't ignore. The lantern flickered once, its light dimming for a moment before flaring back to life. She stood at the edge of the well, gazing down into the darkness below. For a moment, she saw nothing, just the empty void of the stone basin. But then, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A single drop of water, shimmering like liquid silver, fell from the edge of the well and splashed into the depths below. The moment the water touched the surface, the entire well seemed to shudder. The air around her crackled with energy, and the whispers intensified, now clearly intelligible. "Look into the well, Illyra. Your truth lies there, waiting to be found." The voice was different now, not the hollow whisper from before, but one that seemed grounded in the earth itself. It was her mother's voice. Illyra's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how she knew, but the voice felt like home, like something long buried inside her. Something she had forgotten. With trembling hands, she leaned forward, peering into the well. The water's surface rippled, and slowly, images began to form in the depths. The first image was a memory, blurry, faded. She saw herself as a child, playing in the garden behind the house, running through the tall grass with her mother. They were laughing, the sunlight warming their faces as they chased one another. It was a simple moment, but it felt like everything at once. The laughter, the warmth, the love. The image shifted. Now, she saw her mother sitting at a wooden table, her face weary, her hands busy with the task of writing something in a journal. Illyra could almost hear the sound of the pen scratching against paper, the soft rustle of pages turning. She could feel the heaviness in the air, the tension between them, but there was something more. A letter. Her mother had written a letter. And then, as quickly as the image appeared, it dissolved into another. The next scene was darker. The memory was clouded with shadows, but Illyra could make out the figure of a man, tall, dark-haired, his face obscured by the shadows of the room. The man stood over her mother, who was sitting at the table, her hands clutching the letter she had written, her face filled with sorrow. "You can't go through with this," the man's voice echoed in Illyra's mind. "You can't leave him. Leave her." Her mother's voice was soft but firm. "I have to. There's no other choice." Illyra's heart sank as she watched her mother stand, tears in her eyes. She didn't know who the man was, but she knew the weight of the moment. The pain. The heartbreak. Illyra pulled away from the well, her breath shallow, her chest tightening. The memory had been too real, too raw. Her mother had left. Left for something, someone, but what? Who? She didn't have the answers yet, but the well had given her a piece of the puzzle. A glimpse of something she had buried deep within herself. Her hand still gripped the lantern, its light now steady and unwavering. She turned back to the path, the whispers of the forest now quiet, as if the trees themselves were waiting for her next move. There was more to discover, more to remember. And she knew, deep down, that the truth was waiting for her just ahead. As Illyra continued walking, the night deepened, and the moon above illuminated the path ahead. The forest stretched out before her, the trees whispering once more, their voices now softer, more urgent. She wasn't alone anymore. Her journey had just begun. The path ahead of Illyra was cloaked in the soft glow of moonlight, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The forest felt alive, each step she took deepening the connection between herself and the land around her. Every leaf, every stone, seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, as if it were waiting for her to make the next move. The lantern pumpkin in her hand glowed steadily, its light a constant companion, guiding her through the thickening darkness. She had felt it before, the subtle pull of something deep within the hollow, something familiar and ancient, drawing her forward. But now, with the memories of her mother and the choice that had shaped her past, Illyra felt more certain than ever. She was not just walking through a forest. She was walking through her own past, piecing together fragments of a story she had long forgotten. The path wound deeper into the heart of the hollow, and the air grew cooler as she walked. The rustle of leaves was replaced by a stillness, as though the entire forest had held its breath in anticipation of her arrival. The lantern in her hand flickered briefly, casting shadows that danced along the trees like fleeting spirits. As she walked, she began to notice something strange. The trees around her seemed to be changing, their bark becoming smoother, more polished, their leaves turning a golden hue, even though it was still autumn. It was as though the forest itself was transforming in response to her presence. At the edge of the path, a stone archway appeared out of nowhere, its weathered stones carved with intricate symbols. The arch stood tall and proud, its presence commanding, and yet it felt welcoming, as if it had been waiting for her to find it. Illyra stepped forward, her breath catching as she passed beneath the archway. The air shifted immediately, the temperature dropping, and a faint whisper brushed her ear. The voice was soft but clear. The path you walk is the one you've always been meant to find. She paused, her heart skipping a beat. The voice was familiar, yet distant, a blend of her own thoughts and the hollow's ancient presence. It was the same voice she had heard earlier, in the whispers of the trees, the voice that had guided her this far. The archway led to a small clearing, and at its center stood a stone pedestal, overgrown with ivy and moss. Upon the pedestal rested a book, its cover old and worn, its pages yellowed with age. The book seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as though it contained knowledge and secrets that had been hidden for centuries. Illyra felt an almost irresistible pull toward the book. She stepped forward, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached out to touch the cover. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, the book opened on its own, the pages turning as if guided by some unseen force. The pages of the book were filled with strange symbols and drawings, their meanings unclear. But as Illyra skimmed through them, one page caught her attention. It was an image of a woman, her face obscured by shadows, but her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The woman stood beneath a tree, her hands outstretched toward the sky, as if calling to something. And beneath the image were words, written in a language Illyra did not recognize. As she stared at the page, something stirred deep within her. The woman in the drawing seemed familiar, not just familiar, but intimately connected to her. It was like looking at a piece of herself, someone she had known long ago but had forgotten. The book's pages turned again, and another drawing appeared. This time, it was of the same woman, but she was standing beside a man, his face also obscured, but his posture just as commanding as hers. Together, they stood before an ancient door, their hands raised in unison as if they were preparing to open it. The book trembled in Illyra's hands, and a voice, the same voice, spoke again. "You have seen the truth. The woman, the man, the door. They are the key to what you must do. You have walked this path before, Illyra. But now, you must choose if you will walk it again." The words sent a chill through her, and Illyra stepped back from the pedestal, her mind racing. What was the meaning of the woman and the man? What was this door they were standing before? And why did she feel like she already knew the answers? The book began to glow faintly, its pages glowing with the soft light of the lantern, as if it were drawing its power from the very land itself. The symbols on the pages shimmered, forming words that Illyra could almost understand, but not quite. The door is within you, Illyra. You must decide whether to open it. Illyra stood frozen, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The path before her had always been unclear, but now, it was laid out before her like an open door, waiting for her to choose. The door, it had been there all along, but now it was time to step through it. She glanced back at the archway, the path she had just walked, and the memories of the hollow of her mother, of the past she had left behind. Everything was connected now. Every choice she made had brought her here, to this moment. With a deep breath, Illyra closed the book. The lantern in her hand flickered one final time, then settled into a steady glow. She turned toward the path ahead, her heart pounding in her chest. The forest was quiet now, the whispers gone. All that was left was the sound of her own breath, steady and sure. She was ready. And with that, Illyra began to walk toward the door that awaited her. The air shifted as Illyra approached the door, an ancient, weathered thing, its surface carved with intricate symbols and worn by the hands of time. It stood at the edge of the clearing, waiting for her. The lantern pumpkin in her hand still flickered, its light casting soft shadows on the ground beneath her feet, but there was no mistaking the pull she felt toward the door. It was as if everything had been leading her here to this very moment. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the door. The moment she made contact, a shudder ran through the air, and the world around her seemed to pause. The fog thickened, swirling around her legs, and for a fleeting second, the world appeared as a mosaic, the past, the present, and the future all existing at once. The voice from before echoed in her mind. The door is within you, Illyra. You have already seen the truth. Now, you must choose to step into it. Illyra's heart raced. She didn't know what lay beyond the door, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't turn back. The journey she had started had led her to this point. The hollow, the memories, the choices, they were all part of something larger, something she couldn't ignore. With a deep breath, Illyra grasped the door handle. It turned easily in her hand, as if the door had been waiting for her to open it. As she pushed it inward, a burst of light flooded the space before her. The lantern pumpkin in her hand flared brightly, casting long shadows across the ground. When the light faded, Illyra found herself standing in a vast, open space. The ground beneath her feet was soft and uneven, like earth that had never been disturbed. Tall trees stretched toward the sky, their branches heavy with fruits and flowers that Illyra didn't recognize. The air was thick with the scent of something ancient, something untouchable. But it wasn't the landscape that caught her attention. It was the figures. Across the clearing, standing beneath the shadow of an enormous tree, were several people. They were still, watching her, as if they had been waiting for her arrival. Some were familiar faces she had seen before, in memories and reflections. Others were strangers, but there was something in their eyes, something that felt familiar, like they had always been there. Illyra stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of their gaze upon her, but she didn't falter. She had come this far. The first figure she approached was a woman tall and regal, with silver hair that cascaded down her back like a river of light. Her eyes glowed with a soft, otherworldly light, and when she spoke, her voice was like the rustle of leaves in the wind. Illyra, the woman said softly, her lips curling into a knowing smile. I've been waiting for you. Illyra's breath caught in her throat. Who are you? The woman's smile deepened. I am the one who guides. The keeper of the paths that you have walked and the ones that remain. You've found your way here, but there is much left to discover. Illyra looked around at the others standing in the clearing. There were 5 of them in total, each one different, but each carrying the same quiet power. Each of them felt like a part of her, a reflection of something she couldn't yet fully grasp. The woman stepped aside, and a tall man moved forward, his expression serious but calm. His skin was dark, his features sharp and defined. He held a long staff, its top crowned with a crystal that shimmered with an inner light. "You've already seen the surface," the man said, his voice steady. "But there is more beneath it. More waiting to be revealed. You've come to the place where all things converge, where all choices are laid bare." Illyra nodded, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" He raised the staff, and the ground beneath them rippled. The air vibrated, and for a moment, the landscape around them shifted, revealing glimpses of different paths, roads, tunnels, doors, and gates, all stretching into infinity. "This is the place where all the paths lead," he said. "The door you opened was not just a door to the outside world. It was a door to yourself. The paths you have walked, the choices you have made, they have led you here. And now, you must choose once again." Illyra stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. She had opened the door. She had entered this world. But now, she had to decide what to do with it. What did it all mean? And what was the truth she was meant to uncover? The woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, her gaze softening. "You've carried the weight of your past with you, Illyra. The memories, the choices, the questions. But now is the time to let go of the old stories and write your own." Illyra felt the weight of the lantern pumpkin in her hand. It was still glowing, its light steady and bright. She raised it toward the sky, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. She understood now. This was her story. Her choice. The others were merely reflections of the paths she could take, the guidance she needed, but not the answer she was seeking. The answer was within her. With a deep breath, Illyra set the lantern pumpkin down at the base of the enormous tree. The light flickered for a moment, then faded. She stepped back, the ground beneath her shifting as the roots of the tree seemed to stretch out toward her, as if the earth itself was acknowledging her presence. "You've chosen," the woman said softly. Illyra turned to face her, her heart calm now, her mind clear. "I've chosen to walk my own path," she said. And with that, the world around her began to change. The trees shifted, the air lightened, and the ground beneath her feet felt solid, grounded. The choice had been made. The clearing was quiet again. The figures, though still present, faded into the background as Illyra stepped forward. The path ahead was open, the way forward illuminated not by lanterns or light, but by the clarity of her own heart. She had found the truth. It wasn't in the past, nor in the future. It was in this moment, in the choices she made, and in the stories she was about to create. And so, Illyra walked forward, the echo of her footsteps carrying her into the unknown, where new memories and paths awaited. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers as Illyra continued down the path. The world around her felt different now, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted, becoming more solid with each step. The forest, once tangled and uncertain, now seemed to open before her, as if the trees themselves were making way for her journey. The lantern pumpkin that had guided her remained steady in her hand, its faint glow illuminating the path ahead. Illyra's mind, however, was anything but steady. Her heart was calm, but her thoughts raced. The decision she had made at the clearing to walk her own path had given her a sense of clarity. But the deeper she went into the hollow, the more she realized that the journey was far from over. The trees around her began to thin, the path opening up into a vast expanse of open land. In the distance, Illyra could see the towering silhouette of what looked like an ancient stone temple. It stood at the edge of a large, still lake, the water reflecting the moonlight like a perfect mirror. The temple was old, its stones weathered by time, but there was a power in its presence, a presence that seemed to draw Illyra closer. She stepped forward, her feet moving of their own accord. The air felt cooler now, the distant hum of the hollow fading behind her. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to reach the temple. As Illyra drew closer, the stone archway that marked the entrance to the temple came into view. The arch was adorned with intricate carvings, patterns that seemed to swirl and shift like living vines. At the center of the arch, a doorway stood, but it was not just an ordinary door. It was made of roots thick, twisting tendrils that wove in and out, forming a natural barrier between her and the unknown beyond. Illyra stopped before the door, her breath steady but her heart racing. She had seen doors before, had crossed many thresholds in her journey. But this was different. The roots of the door pulsed, alive with energy. It was as if the door itself was a living entity, waiting for her to decide whether or not she was ready to pass through. The lantern pumpkin in her hand flickered once, as if in answer to the unspoken question in her mind. With a deep breath, Illyra reached out and placed her hand against the roots. The moment her fingers touched the door, the air around her shifted. The roots responded to her touch, parting slowly, the tendrils shifting and unwinding to reveal the path beyond. Illyra stepped forward, her body filled with a strange sense of anticipation. Beyond the door, the temple's interior was bathed in an eerie glow. The walls were lined with stone pillars, each one carved with symbols and images of ancient times, of people, animals, and strange creatures that Illyra couldn't fully understand. The floor beneath her feet was smooth and cold, made of stone that seemed to hum with a power she could feel deep within her chest. At the center of the temple, on a raised platform, was a stone altar. Upon it, a single object lay, a book, its cover dark and worn, its edges gilded with gold. Illyra could feel the pull of the book, the same pull that had guided her through Gourd Hollow. It was as if the book was calling to her, waiting for her to uncover its secrets. She stepped forward, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence of the temple. The book seemed to shimmer in the dim light, its presence more palpable the closer she got. When she reached the altar, she hesitated, her fingers hovering just above the book's surface. For a moment, she wondered if she was ready to uncover whatever secrets the book contained. She had learned so much already about her past, her choices, the path that had led her here. But what was waiting in the pages of this book? Was it the final piece of the puzzle? Or was it a new beginning? Illyra's fingers brushed against the cover, and as soon as she made contact, the book opened on its own, the pages turning as if an invisible hand had guided them. The first page she saw was blank. But then, as her gaze moved over the next few pages, she began to see words, strange, cryptic symbols that seemed to shift and change before her eyes. They were familiar, but not in a way she could immediately understand. It was as if the language of the book was hidden, waiting for her to decipher it. Illyra turned the pages slowly, her heart beating faster with each word that appeared. Then, in the center of the page, she saw something she recognized, a drawing of a woman standing at the edge of a vast, empty plain. The woman's face was obscured by shadows, but the posture was unmistakable. She was holding something in her hands, but it wasn't clear what it was. The next page showed a man, his face just as obscured, standing beside her. Together, they were gazing at a large stone door in the distance, its surface covered with the same symbols that adorned the temple. Illyra's breath caught in her throat. The figures in the book, the woman, the man, they were the same as the ones she had seen in the vision at the barn. They were part of her story, part of the story of Gourd Hollow. But what did they mean? And why were they so important? She turned the page again, and this time, the symbols were clearer. There was a map, a detailed sketch of Gourd Hollow, the path she had walked, the forest, the temple. But it was more than that. The map seemed to indicate hidden paths, roads she had yet to take. Illyra's eyes widened as the realization hit her. The book was not just a collection of memories or stories. It was a guide, a map to something deeper. Something hidden beneath the surface of the hollow. She closed the book gently, her mind racing with the possibilities. The temple, the door, the path ahead, they were all part of something much larger than she had realized. With the book now closed, Illyra turned to face the altar. The light from the lantern pumpkin flickered, casting shadows across the temple. The air was still, and the world outside seemed distant, as if time itself had slowed. The journey was far from over. But for the first time, Illyra felt like she was beginning to understand her place in the story. The roots of the hollow ran deep, and so did the choices she had yet to make. The book was heavy in Illyra's hands, its weight grounding her as she stepped back from the altar. The echoes of the temple seemed to vibrate through the air, its silence pressing in on her, as though the walls themselves were watching her, waiting for her to decide what came next. The lantern pumpkin in her hand flickered softly, its glow illuminating the intricate symbols etched across the walls. Illyra glanced down at the book once more. The hidden paths, the maps, the symbols, they were all leading her to something deeper within Gourd Hollow. She could feel it in her bones, that deep pull to uncover more, to follow the threads of the story that had been laid out before her. The path she had walked so far was only the beginning. The truth, the real truth, was still hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. And now, with the book in her hands, Illyra knew she was ready to uncover it. The temple felt different now. The walls that had once seemed cold and distant now hummed with a quiet energy, as if they were alive with the power of the hollow. The stone altar where the book had rested was still, but the air around it shimmered, as though the space itself was alive with potential. With a final glance at the altar, Illyra turned and walked toward the back of the temple. There was a narrow corridor leading deeper into the structure, one that had been hidden from view before. The lantern pumpkin's glow flickered as she stepped into the passage, casting long shadows against the stone walls. The air grew cooler, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. As she walked further down the corridor, Illyra noticed something unusual. The walls were lined with carvings, more intricate and detailed than anything she had seen in the rest of the temple. They depicted scenes of ancient rituals, people standing in circles beneath the trees, their arms raised in unison, as though invoking something unseen. At the end of the corridor, Illyra found a door. It was not like the others, not a simple wooden door, but one made of thick, twisting roots. They twisted together like vines, creating a living, organic barrier that pulsed with energy. It was as if the door itself was a part of the hollow, a living entity, a part of the land that had been waiting for her. Illyra stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the roots. The moment she touched them, the door responded, its tendrils shifting and opening, revealing a hidden passage beyond. Beyond the door was a labyrinth, a twisting network of corridors, each one darker and more labyrinthine than the last. The air grew thick with an ancient scent, and Illyra could hear the faintest whispers, voices that seemed to come from all around her, from the walls themselves. The deeper she walked, the more the paths began to diverge, leading her in different directions. Some were narrow and cramped, others wide and open, as though the very landscape was shifting and changing around her. And then, in the distance, she saw something, a glowing light. She approached it cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The light was soft, almost ethereal, and it seemed to beckon her forward. As she drew closer, the light coalesced into a figure, a shadowy form standing in the center of a vast, open chamber. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadows, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness around them. Illyra stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't see the figure clearly, but she knew instinctively that it was not someone she had met before. The presence was unfamiliar, yet strangely familiar. The figure spoke, its voice soft but commanding. "You have come to the heart of the hollow, Illyra. The path you have chosen is not without consequence." Illyra stood still, her gaze locked with the figure's glowing eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. The figure stepped forward, its form slowly becoming clearer. It was a man, tall and powerful, his face shadowed by a hood. The cloak he wore seemed to ripple with the energy of the hollow itself, and the ground beneath his feet shifted as he moved. "I am the guardian of the hollow," the man said. "I have watched over this place for centuries, waiting for the one who could see beyond the veil." Illyra's mind raced. The guardian of the hollow. She had felt the power of the hollow, the strange connection she had with the land, but this was something different. This man was not just a figure of legend, he was part of the hollow itself. What do you mean, the one who could see beyond the veil? She asked, taking a cautious step forward. The guardian's eyes glowed brighter. The hollow is not just a place. It is a living, breathing entity, Illyra. It has always been, and it will always be. But it is also a place of choice, the choices of those who walk within it. You have seen the paths, the hidden doors. You have made the choice to walk them, but now you must face what lies beyond. Illyra felt the weight of his words settle on her. She had chosen to walk this path. She had chosen to open the doors, to uncover the truth of Gourd Hollow. But now, it seemed, the real challenge was beginning. The hollow had more to reveal, more than she had ever imagined. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice steady with resolve. The guardian stepped aside, revealing a small stone pedestal in the center of the chamber. Atop it was a glowing crystal, pulsing with energy. The crystal seemed to resonate with the very air around them, its light growing brighter with each passing moment. Take the crystal, the guardian said. It will guide you, Illyra. It will show you the path forward. But be warned, the choices you make here will echo across time. The hollow will test you. It will challenge you. And you must decide whether you are ready to face it. Illyra stood before the pedestal, the weight of the crystal pulling her in. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against its surface. The moment her skin touched the crystal, a surge of energy shot through her, flooding her mind with visions and memories, glimpses of futures and pasts, of paths yet to be walked. And in that instant, she understood. The crystal was more than just a guide. It was a key to the hollow, to the choices she had made, and to the ones she would make in the future. As she pulled her hand back, the visions faded, but the weight of her decision remained. The crystal was now a part of her, its glow steady and unwavering. It was time to choose again, to step forward and face whatever lay ahead. With the crystal in her hand, Illyra turned toward the guardian, ready to walk the next path. Illyra held the crystal tightly in her hand, its glow steady but pulsing with an energy that seemed to resonate with her very soul. It was a strange feeling, as though the crystal were a part of her, its warmth a quiet reminder of the choices that lay before her. The vision she had glimpsed when she touched the crystal still lingered in her mind, paths, choices, futures she had not yet seen but somehow felt. The guardian watched her silently, his eyes glowing faintly beneath the shadow of his hood. There was something about his presence that was both calming and unnerving. He was not a man, not really. He was something older, something tied to the land itself, to the very essence of Gourd Hollow. You have seen the future, the guardian said, his voice like the rustle of leaves in a windstorm. But not all futures are certain. The choices you make here will shape what is to come, Illyra. And the hollow will test you, as it has tested all those who have come before you. Illyra's fingers tightened around the crystal. The weight of his words pressed on her, but she didn't flinch. She had already made her choice to come this far. There was no turning back now. What must I do? She asked, her voice steady, though her heart beat loudly in her chest. The guardian stepped aside, gesturing toward the vast, open space beyond the chamber. The path is open to you. But you must decide which way to walk. The crystal will guide you, but only if you trust in it and in yourself. Illyra glanced around, taking in the temple one last time. The stone walls, the intricate carvings, the symbols etched into the very foundation of the hollow. It all felt so ancient, so tied to something larger than herself. But as she stood there, the weight of the crystal in her hand, she realized that this was her journey, her choice to make. The hollow had been waiting for someone to choose, and now, it was waiting for her. She turned toward the door of the temple, the roots still entwined in the shape of an archway. The forest beyond called to her, the trees whispering in the distance, beckoning her forward. The paths she had seen in the visions, the paths that branched out in every direction, were still there, just beyond the threshold. Stepping outside the temple, Illyra felt the cool night air brush against her skin. The fog had lifted slightly, and the moonlight bathed the land in a soft, silver glow. She could feel the land shifting beneath her feet, the earth alive with energy. It was as though the hollow was watching her, waiting to see what she would do. Her eyes scanned the horizon, and she saw the paths ahead, each one leading somewhere different. Some were wide and open, others narrow and winding. Some were filled with the light of the moon, others shrouded in darkness. The crystal in her hand seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as her heartbeat, guiding her toward a choice. The voice of the guardian echoed in her mind once more. The hollow is not just a place, Illyra. It is a reflection of you. The paths you choose here will reflect the choices you have made, and the ones you will make. Will you walk the path of light, or will you step into the shadows and seek the truth in darkness? Illyra looked down at the crystal in her hand. It was warm, the glow radiating softly. For a moment, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, as if all the choices of the past and future rested in her hands. But then, something shifted. The light of the crystal grew brighter, its glow steady and pure. It was not just a guide, it was a compass, a reminder that no matter what path she chose, it would be the right one. The choices she made would shape her journey, but they would not define her. She was more than the sum of her past, more than the mistakes and regrets she carried. She took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs as she centered herself. The hollow had given her the key. Now, it was time to unlock the door and step through. With a final glance toward the temple, Illyra made her decision. She didn't need to walk the path of light or the path of darkness. She would walk her path, the one that was hers to choose. She stepped forward, the crystal's light guiding her steps as she moved toward the first of the many paths before her. The land shifted beneath her, the trees whispering softly, as if they were welcoming her to the journey ahead. The fog began to thin, the moonlight growing brighter as she walked, and Illyra knew that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was long, filled with twists and turns. The forest seemed to open and close around her, its branches reaching out like arms, guiding her, protecting her. She felt the pull of the hollow, the deep connection between herself and the land, as if it was a part of her soul, waiting to be rediscovered. As she walked, Illyra felt something stir within her. The crystal pulsed, its light now steady, and she could feel the presence of something ancient, a force of nature that had watched over the hollow for centuries. It was not just the land that was alive, but the very stories that had been woven into it. She was part of that story now. As Illyra continued down the path, the trees around her began to change, their trunks growing thicker, their leaves darker. The air grew cooler, and she could hear the soft sound of water flowing nearby. She knew that she was nearing the edge of the hollow, where the final choice would be made. The crystal in her hand pulsed again, and she felt its light grow brighter, as though it was urging her forward. There was something beyond the forest, beyond the path, something waiting for her. And Illyra knew that she was ready to face it. The journey had led Illyra to this moment, to the very edge of Gourd Hollow, where the paths converged and the land itself seemed to hold its breath. The crystal in her hand pulsed steadily, its light now brighter than ever before, guiding her through the thickening fog. Every step felt heavier than the last, each one carrying the weight of everything she had learned, everything she had discovered about herself and the hollow. The forest around her had grown quiet, the once rustling trees now still, their branches heavy with the weight of waiting. The air felt charged with energy, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for her to make the final choice. Ahead of her, the path began to narrow, the trees growing denser, their roots twisting and curling like fingers reaching for the sky. The ground beneath her feet was soft and uneven, the air thick with the scent of earth and moss. It felt as though the very land was alive, watching her, guiding her toward the final trial. At the end of the path, Illyra could see it, a massive stone archway, standing tall and imposing at the edge of the forest. The arch was covered in ivy and moss, the stones worn smooth by time, but there was something about it that felt ancient. It pulsed with an energy, as though it were a doorway to another world. As Illyra approached the archway, the crystal in her hand began to glow even brighter, its light casting long shadows along the path. She could hear a soft humming sound, like the sound of distant whispers, and it seemed to be coming from the arch itself. She stepped forward, the light of the crystal guiding her every movement. The moment her foot crossed the threshold of the archway, the world around her shifted. The forest behind her disappeared, replaced by a vast, open plain. The sky above was dark, filled with swirling clouds, and the air was thick with tension. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and barren, as though the earth itself had been worn away by time and neglect. In the center of the plain, a massive stone pedestal stood, its surface etched with symbols and runes. Upon it, a large stone tablet rested, its surface smooth and dark. The tablet seemed to shimmer with a strange, ethereal light, as though it held the key to something hidden. Illyra walked toward the pedestal, the crystal in her hand now pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. As she approached, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, the air growing heavier, and she could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful watching her. When she reached the pedestal, Illyra placed the crystal on the stone tablet. The moment it touched the surface, the entire plane seemed to come alive. The air crackled with energy, and the symbols on the pedestal began to glow, their light spreading outwards like a ripple in water. A low rumble echoed across the plane, and Elora stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The tablet began to glow brighter, and the symbols on its surface shifted and changed, forming new patterns that Elora couldn't quite understand. The air around her grew thick, and she could hear the faintest whispers, as though the very land was speaking to her. The whispers grew louder, the words clearer. "You have come far, Elora," a voice said, soft yet powerful. "You have walked the paths, made the choices. But now, you must face the final trial." Elora looked up, her gaze shifting to the sky. The clouds above began to swirl, forming a massive vortex in the center of the sky. The wind picked up, howling through the plain, and Elora could feel the ground beneath her feet tremble. "The trial is not one of strength," the voice continued. "It is one of choice. You must choose which path to walk, Elora. Will you embrace the truth, or will you continue to run from it?" The ground beneath her feet began to crack, and Elora took a step back, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on her, the decision weighing on her mind. The truth she had been seeking, the answers she had longed for, they were here, in the plane, in the tablet, in the choices she had made. But what truth would she embrace? The ground cracked again, and Elora found herself standing at the edge of a chasm. The edges of the chasm were sharp, jagged, and the bottom was obscured by darkness. The air above it was thick with energy, crackling with power. And in the center of the chasm, a single door stood, its surface covered in the same symbols that had been etched into the pedestal. "This is your final choice," the voice said, now echoing through the chasm. "The door leads to the truth you seek. But it is not the truth you expect. It is the truth you need. Will you walk through it?" Elora's breath caught in her throat. The chasm was vast, its depths unknown, its darkness swallowing everything. The door seemed so far away, but she knew it was the key to everything, to the truth she had longed to understand. Elora closed her eyes, her mind racing. She could hear the wind howling, the whispers growing louder, the rumbling of the earth beneath her feet. The door called to her, its energy pulling her forward. It was a choice she had to make, a decision that would shape everything that came after. She opened her eyes, the crystal still glowing brightly in her hand. The door was waiting. It was her choice. Without another thought, Elora stepped forward, her feet light as she crossed the chasm's edge. The door loomed closer, the symbols on its surface glowing with an intensity that matched the beating of her heart. As she reached out to touch the door, the world around her seemed to dissolve. The chasm, the plane, the storm in the sky, they all faded, and Elora was enveloped in light. The door loomed before her, its surface shimmering with an ethereal glow, beckoning her forward. Elora's heart pounded in her chest, every beat a reminder of the weight of the choice she was about to make. She could feel the energy of the hollow coursing through her, its power vibrating in the air, waiting for her to step into the unknown. With a deep breath, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the door. The moment she made contact, a surge of energy shot through her body, and the world around her seemed to dissolve into light. For a moment, there was nothing but light, pure, overwhelming light that filled every corner of her being, every thought, every breath. It was as though she were floating in a space between worlds, caught between the past and the future, between the choices she had made and the ones still to come. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light faded, and Illyra found herself standing in the center of the hollow, the land around her familiar but changed. The trees were still tall, their leaves rustling in the breeze, but there was a stillness now, a quiet that spoke of something monumental having passed. The air was thick with a sense of completion, as if the very land had exhaled in relief. In the distance, the figure of the guardian appeared, his form illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. He was no longer cloaked in shadows, but stood before her, his face clear and full of purpose. "You have arrived, Illyra," the guardian said, his voice resonating in the silence. "You have made the choice. You have walked the paths, uncovered the truths, and now the hollow is complete." Illyra stood still, her heart quiet now, the weight of the journey settling around her. She had faced trials, uncovered mysteries, and walked through doors that led her to places she never thought possible. But now, as she stood here, she realized the final truth. "What does it all mean?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The guardian stepped closer, his presence comforting yet full of authority. "It means you have become a part of the hollow, Illyra. You were never separate from it. From the beginning, you were the thread that connected its past, its present, and its future. The choices you made, they were not just yours. They were part of the hollow's story, part of its essence." Illyra looked around at the land, at the trees, the stones, the wind that brushed against her skin. It was all so familiar, yet there was a sense of finality to it now. She had been a part of this land all along, her choices leading her to this moment where everything had come full circle. The guardian's words lingered in her mind. She wasn't just a visitor in Gourd Hollow. She was a part of it. The land had been waiting for her to uncover its secrets, to step into the truth of what it was and what it could be. "What happens now?" Illyra asked, the question on her lips as she turned back to face the guardian. The guardian's eyes softened. "Now, the land will continue, as it always has. But so will you. You have chosen your path, Illyra. And with that, you will shape the future of the hollow. The truth has been revealed, and it is not something that can be undone. The land will grow, evolve, and change just as you will." Illyra stood there, the weight of his words settling in her chest. The hollow was not just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and she had become a part of its story. She had been given the key to unlock its mysteries, and now, it was her turn to write the next chapter. "I understand," Illyra said quietly. "I will walk my path, but the hollow will walk with me." The guardian nodded, his expression serene. Exactly. And you will not walk alone. The hollow will always be with you, as it has been with those who came before you. For a moment, Illyra stood there, taking in the stillness of the land. The wind whispered through the trees, the rustling leaves filling the air with their ancient song. The lantern pumpkin she still held in her hand flickered softly, its light a constant reminder of the journey she had walked and the one that still lay ahead. She had faced the unknown, uncovered truths, and made choices that had shaped her destiny. But now, as she stood in the heart of the hollow, she understood that this was not an end. It was a beginning. With one last glance at the guardian, Illyra turned and began walking toward the edge of the forest. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she knew now that the future was hers to create. The hollow was not just a place she had discovered, it was a part of her, and she was a part of it. The world stretched out before her, its possibilities endless. And as Illyra walked forward, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The hollow had shown her the truth, but it was her turn to shape it.